it's very difficult for Israel to take out Iran's program at a tactical level. All the intelligence problems the United States faces, Israel presumably would face as well.
This is Faith Complex, a dialogue about the entanglement of religion, politics, and art.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlineblau of Georgetown University, and you're watching Faith Complex. Joining us today is Professor Daniel Byman. He is director of the Center for Peace and Security Studies at Georgetown University and author of the forthcoming book, A High Price: The Triumphs and Failures of Israeli Counterterrorism. Professor Byman, welcome to Faith Complex.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, we recently celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Islamic Republic of Iran, though few of us were raising our glasses. I guess the question I'm going to ask you is, how close are the Iranians to a fully deployable nuclear weapon?
There are different estimates. The ones that are optimistic from an Iranian point of view are about 6 months away. Others say 2 years or even 5 years. A lot depends on the intentions of the Iranian regime. Some people believe that the Iranian regime is hell-bent trying to use everything in its arsenal in order to get a nuclear weapon. Others believe it simply wants a nuclear capability, something like Japan, where it could go nuclear within 6 months, but never takes the final step towards an actual nuclear weapon.
And what is your reasoned professional opinion? What do you think they're after?
I think they do want a nuclear weapon. I think until relatively recently, this was debated in Iranian circles, but they've put so much emphasis on this in public that I think it would be difficult for the current leadership, or really any leadership, 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, to say, well, we didn't go that final step. We didn't produce a weapon.
Now, most nation states that produce these weapons really think of them psychologically as a deterrent. They don't think of them in attack mode, if you will. Would that be the psychology of the Iranian regime, to think of it uniquely as a deterrent?
I think Iran's primary motives are deterrence. From Iran's point of view, it is in a very hostile neighborhood. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear weapons. The United States has built up massive troop presences, not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also a series of bases along the Persian Gulf littoral, and also has facilities in Central Asia. It sees itself as surrounded, and this is something that the regime is quite sensitive to.
Is it a domestic prestige issue as well? Is it something to prove to the populace, hey, we did this, we've accomplished something?
Absolutely. What we've seen in the recent demonstrations is not only counter demonstrations by pro-regime forces, but also at the same time the current leadership emphasizing the nuclear program. It's their way of trying to take the wind out of the opposition sails by saying, if you're against our government, you're against the nuclear program.
All right, let's talk about the United States. What exactly is our thinking on Iran and its nuclear weapon capacity?
The United States, from President Bush, President Obama, have repeatedly emphasized that an Iranian nuclear weapon is unacceptable.
Do we mean it?
Right.
Do we mean it?
That's a great question. The answer is maybe not. We've tried to put pressure on the Iranian regime in a variety of ways, but Iran has made progress. And at some point, if the current projections hold true, it's going to have a nuclear weapon. So the question then becomes, how do you deal with nuclear Iran, not how do you stop Iran from becoming nuclear? Again and again, the military option has been put on the table, but people are very skeptical that that's going to produce the results that the United States wants.
Now, why exactly, from the United States point of view, why the skepticism about the military option? Is it just a tactical nightmare, or is it unaccomplishable? Why not?
The military option has several problems. One of the biggest is that it's simply very hard to find all the Iranian facilities. This has been a subject of intense intelligence interest for decades now. But even beyond that, Iran has the ability to retaliate. Now, not in a nuclear sense, but the United States has over 100,000 troops in Iraq. It's building up forces in Afghanistan. And Iran has tremendous influence in both these countries. So if the United States were to attack Iran, Iran would likely sow unrest, or more unrest, in Iraq or Afghanistan, greatly complicating the president's agenda in these countries.
So the impression really is that the United States is deterred by certain geopolitical considerations before going in. But then there's Israel.
Israel, unlike the United States, has less to lose by a military strike on Iran. It, of course, doesn't have troops in Iran's neighborhood. It's relatively hard for Iran to strike back at Israel, although it's likely that the Lebanese Hezbollah would probably do some attacks in response to an Israeli strike. But all that said, it's very difficult for Israel to take out Iran's program at a tactical level. all the intelligence problems the United States faces, Israel presumably would face as well. And beyond that, Israel also faces difficulties in getting large numbers of airplanes over Iran. It's a long way from Israel. They'd have to overfly Saudi airspace or Iraqi airspace, neither of which would be particularly welcome from these countries. And it's quite difficult tactically.
Now, the excellence of the Israeli military is well known. What do you think we're looking at from a military tactical point of view? If the Israelis were actually to go in with an American blessing, what would they do?
Israel would have to do a combination of air and possibly missile strikes on Iran. In my view, it would probably be airstrikes. It would probably be a fairly significant package of long-range bombers and fighter escorts. And in order to do that, they would need superb intelligence. But they would not be able to put ground troops in Iran. It's simply too far from Israel, too dangerous for its forces. The possibility of a troop being killed or captured would be a disaster for Israel.
Now, we know the Iranians, they're holding their own deterrent, and these are their proxies in the form of Hezbollah, and perhaps to a lesser extent, Hamas. To what degree is Hezbollah, in a way, a deterrent that Iran uses to hold the Israelis in check?
Israel sees Hezbollah as really an Iranian division deployed in Lebanon. In my view, that's a bit of an overstatement, but only a bit. Hezbollah and Iran have historically been exceptionally close. Indeed, it's fair to say, I think, that Iran midwifed the birth of Hezbollah over 20 years ago. And even though the relationship today is as much partner as it is proxy, Hezbollah sees itself in Iran's camp.
During the 2006 Lebanon War, the Hezbollah War, why did Iran sit on the sidelines while all that was going on? Wasn't that a perfect opportunity to strike Israel?
Iran has very few options for striking Israel. Iran does have some long-range missiles that could strike Israel, but the missiles aren't accurate. It's almost as likely they'd hit a neighboring country, given Israel's small size.
Does that concern the Iranians in any way, shape, or form, that they might take out a neighboring country?
It would be embarrassing. You know, it's hard to brag about your military if you hit the wrong country.
If you miss the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even if they didn't miss the country, the chances of hitting anything smaller than a city are difficult. But from Iran's point of view, the 2006 war in Lebanon went quite well. There was no need to assist Hezbollah because Hezbollah was holding its own. And that's what Iran had planned for, was to try to make its proxy capable enough to fight on its own 2 feet.
Now, what about, this is a little murkier, the relations between Sunni Hamas and Shiite Iran? What do we know about their military relations?
Hamas is a bit more distant from Iran than Hezbollah, but the relationship has gotten closer. There are these differences. There are, again, Arab versus Persian, Sunni versus Shia. And Hamas has always tried to maintain independence from any state sponsor. But that said, Iran has poured money into Hamas in recent years. And also Iran, through Hezbollah at times directly, has trained Hamas fighters and has designed some weapons, including rockets, especially for use by Hamas. From Iran's point of view, Hamas is an entry point into the Sunni Arab world.
Professor Byman, every time I get an expert in counterterrorism on the show, I always ask them the man on the street question. And we refer to this as the Ben's chili question or the Gray's papaya question in New York City. Let's say Professor Berliner-Blau is enjoying a papaya dog in the West Village of New York City. What is the likelihood of late that there'll be another terrorist strike on U.S. soil, thus interrupting my repast?
In the last 5 years, al-Qaeda has restored itself in Pakistan, really developed a sanctuary there from which it spawned a number of attacks or attempted attacks, certainly in Europe, but also we've seen some individuals in the United States have linkages to that sanctuary. The second thing of concern is that small parts of the American Muslim community have appeared to have been radicalized in the last couple of years. And again, the numbers are very, very tiny, but this is more than they were 5 years ago, and it's enough where I'm worried that a few individuals, perhaps trained by al-Qaeda, might be doing a terrorist attack that could kill a fair number of Americans.
We've been speaking with Professor Daniel Byman, a professor at Georgetown University, an expert on counterterrorism. Professor Byman, thank you so much for coming to Faith Complex today.
Glad to be here.